Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another edition of WOWSA Live with our host, Ned Denison. Ned?
Hello, everyone. I'm an epic marathon swimmer. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, and I know our next guest pretty well. Her name is Caroline Block. She dethroned honoree Alison Streeter, MBE, to take over the the crown of the Queen of the North Channel. Before we get to the swimming, Caroline, tell everybody about your educational and professional career, because it's a little bit different than most.
Sure. So I went to college. Didn't swim in college. I was a fencer in college. And I was pretty sure that I wanted to go back. I was an anthropology major. I was pretty sure that I wanted to go back and get my PhD, but I also really wanted to live in New York. I'm from the suburbs. And so like, it's this thing where you're going into the city and you're growing up and like, that's the goal, right? You want to be there. So I went into investment banking for a short period of time, for about 2 years after college, and it was not for me. I got out. I left at the very end of 2007. So actually, I left, and then within a couple of months, the group was gone anyway. And so what I did when I left is I got in my grad school applications, and once I had those in, I left the country and I went to Jerusalem for about 6 months to sort of hone some skills that I felt like I would need in my graduate work, and then got into a program, came back, taught at a French camp for the summer, and then moved to Baltimore and started my PhD there. At Hopkins. So for an anthropology PhD is a really long program. So I did that. I did my PhD in anthropology, and my research was actually in New York. So I was between Baltimore and New York for like close to a decade. And during that time, especially since I started swimming, if you're doing marathon swimming and you're a student, you definitely need that second and third job. So some of what I was doing was lifeguarding. Other things that I was doing ended up being a lot of legal work, some of which tied into my research and some didn't. And I was a fellow at a law school in New York at the time, at Cardozo Law School. And so when I finished my degree, I thought, for various reasons, that I would pursue a bit of a legal education. And so I just finished my JD like last week at Cornell. So I'm in Ithaca, New York now. And and sort of in that whole time, I taught for a while at Hopkins for the anthropology department and the program for the study of women, gender, and sexuality. So a bunch of different experiences.
So Steve, we have a 24-hour swimming club. I think we need the 20-year educational club. And we'll put Caroline in there as the poster child. So anyways, let's move on to the North Channel. Tell us about this place. Don't be shy. I've heard for years and years and years, it's the toughest swim in the world. Most of the people listening don't know where it is, what it is, or why anybody's saying this. So educate us, Caroline.
Okay, so the North Channel is the stretch of water between Northern Ireland and Portpatrick, or Scotland. And in fact, actually, it's not that whole stretch of water between those two places, right? There are statutory limits. But normally when you'd swim it, you would be going from a place in Northern Ireland called Donaghadee, which is sort of it's a small town that's outside of Bangor, which is outside of Belfast. And then you're going towards Portpatrick, which is just the shortest distance, over in Scotland. It is 35K, so it's slightly longer than the English Channel, which we count as 33K. It is it's colder. Whereas I think a lot of English Channel swims will go out in the high 50s to mid 60s, most in Fahrenheit. But in the North Channel, you're looking at low 50s to mid 50s. So North Channel swims will go out between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius at the outside, with the majority really being between 12 and 14. And yes, there are some increased wildlife considerations in the North Channel. You have these enormous jellyfish called lion's mane jellyfish. And then I think the biggest thing for me, for the North Channel, that sort of distinguishes it from some other swims is it's a little bit less predictable. Like the currents are very strong, but you also can't necessarily time them as well because the weather is so fickle, and then it has an effect on the currents. And so a lot of the times you think the tide is going to turn at one time, and it turns 2 hours early, or and to me, I think that just makes for a lot of good stories. Sort of unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen when you get out there.
So these lion's mane jellyfish, I think you need to spend a little more time talking about them. Is it true they're kind of about this big?
They come in many sizes. There are some really large ones. I think I've read that, the length of their tentacles can exceed the length of a blue whale. And yeah, so they're huge. They can get, bigger than you. And it also kind of, you're always going to get stung on a North Channel swim. Like I can't imagine anyone going on a North Channel swim and not getting stung. If the water is sufficiently choppy and rough, a lot of the time you'll still get stung, but you'll spend a lot of the time looking at them and not necessarily getting stung by all of them. Or when the water is kind of choppy, sometimes it'll also flip them over, so you'll see them and they're below you, and you don't get the full brunt of the sting, but their tentacles are still coming up, so you get sort of peripheral. I think the sting itself is not one of the more venomous ones, but because they have just so many of these fine tentacles and they're so long, you don't get one sting, you just get caught up in it, your whole body. And then if you have, a day that's not rough, especially at night, they'll come up to the surface, and you just have to swim through them. I've heard of people trying to, like direct around them, but you can't really. Like they're everywhere.
Okay. You're relatively new in the marathon swimming sport. You knocked off an English Channel swim just a couple of years ago, and then for some strange reason, you've gravitated to the North Channel. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the sport, and why, oh why, oh why do you keep going back to the North Channel?
So this kind of has two parts. I think so I grew up swimming, like a pool swimmer. I was not particularly talented. I knew I wasn't good enough to swim in college, for example. But when I was 14, I swam from 8 to 14. And when I was 14, kind of unexpectedly, I was invited to be part of this relay that was being sponsored to try and break the world record for a two-way junior English Channel crossing. And I had no open water experience. Like, I had never thought about this, but it sounded really cool. So I said, sure, of course. And so we went and did that. I think looking back, probably the idea was like the previous record was probably pretty slow. It was probably seen as really like low hanging fruit. So we broke it by many, many hours. So I'm 3 times on the double. And one of I got to, climb out at the cape, at the cap, and turn us around. So on the one hand, I stopped swimming after that because I had already started fencing and I felt like I was much better at it, and I was never going to get another world record in swimming. So that was kind of like the height of my swimming career. So I stopped swimming after that. So in one sense, it was completely unconnected to my, current swimming career. But on the other, I don't think I ever would have gotten back into it if like I hadn't had that experience. So then fast forward, at least 15 years, I hadn't swum at all. I had been like lifeguarding but just never getting in the pool. I fenced throughout high school and college. And then in like my third year of grad school, I started running a little bit because I wanted to lose weight, and like everybody. And then as soon as I started running, I did my first 5K, and then I said, well, now I can do an Ironman. I can, and so that was my immediate goal. I was moving to New York to do field work, and I said, well, I'm going to need like a gym membership. I can't afford a gym membership on my research budget. So I started lifeguarding once a week at the JCC. And so, I was training for this Ironman. And while I was lifeguarding at the JCC, I started meeting people who were open water swimmers, including one person who worked there as well, who had swum the English Channel, solo, Bonnie Schwartz. And so we started talking about it, and I started thinking, oh, it'd be a really good thing, like, as a PhD student, you don't get a lot. There aren't a lot of perks, but flexibility is really one of them. So I figured, oh, I'm going to have time. Like I'm going to plan to do an English Channel solo now after I finish the Ironman. So in 2014, I signed up for 2016 slot. I had started swimming a little bit because I was doing triathlon. I signed up in 2014, finished the Ironman in the fall, and then moved back. I had done, I'd started going to the beach at Coney Island a little bit while I was in New York, just to practice for the tri. And then basically, as soon as I finished that, I moved back to Baltimore to start writing and teaching, and also training for this swim that I had signed up for, right? So the only goal was, it wasn't about like the sport. I knew nothing about the sport or the community, really, just like, I'm going to swim the English Channel, and how do I get there? Not having done much swimming for 15 years. So I set it up that in 2015, I would do a 10K and then also a 10-mile swim in the fall. And then I was going to do the Tampa Bay Marathon swim in April. And because I was actually more nervous for that than I was for the Channel, because the Channel was further away, but I had only done like less than a 4-hour swim, and I had Tampa coming up. So I really wanted to do my 6-hour qualifying swim for the Channel before Tampa. So I was searching around, like, how am I going to do this? And my original thought was I was going to go to San Francisco. And I had met these people at a wedding that were from San Francisco, and they said, oh yeah, just come, we'll take care of it. Like, and things fell through. Maybe it was a scam, maybe it wasn't. But people were asking me about it, and they, how is this going? And I was telling them what was happening, and they said, no, nobody should be asking you for $1,000 to come and swim in this public beach. And then somebody said, oh, well, I have these friends who are going to do qualifying swims in Italy in March. And it kind of coincided with, I was teaching at the time, but it coincided with our spring break. And basically I just had to get there. So I went, and my friend ended up not coming, but it was just me and then this group of guys from Ireland. And I was there to do my qualifier, and they kept saying that the water was like 12 or 13 degrees, which I didn't know, because other people were there to do their qualifier for the North Channel. But the number kind of meant nothing to me. I just, I knew I'd like flown across the world to do a qualifier, so I was going to do it, Anyway, but so I really liked these guys, and they, we would get to talking, and they were talking about the North Channel, and I didn't know much about it. I was still just focused on the English Channel. Got my qualifier, and then sort of a month later, I started thinking about it. We're in April now. I started thinking about it, and I thought, like, oh God, there's been so much that I've had to do this year to get ready for the English Channel. Like, I had Tampa, which, when Tampa, that was the year that Tampa actually canceled about 4 hours in. So that was a bust. And there was, I'd gone to Italy, I'd gone to Florida, I had like just done all this stuff. And I said, wow, I don't want to have to do this again next year for another swim. So I'm interested in the North Channel now, because these guys made it sound like so appealing that, like, why don't I see if I can just combine them? So I had the first slot for the English Channel. So I had made my plane tickets, accordingly, that I was going to be there, over in England for, 2 weeks or something. But I didn't know exactly when I'd swim. And I thought, like, maybe I'll have time on the back end if I swim early enough. So I contacted Padraig, who, you know, I'd met in Italy, and I said, listen, can I, like, if I swim early enough in the English Channel and I'm feeling good afterwards, can I come over? Will you take me across the North Channel? And he said, sure. uh, and so that's what happened. I swam the English Channel on July 14th, and then I waited a couple of days to see how I was feeling, and then I had time left in the window, so I went over to Ireland. I mean, mostly at that point, I really just wanted to visit with my friends. I thought it'd be cool to see them again, and you know, hopefully get in a swim. The window that I had, you know, it wasn't a full window. You know, obviously, I just signed up in like late April for this, and he was like trying to squeeze me in, you know, behind some relay, and so I got there. I was actually blown out of the original window, but I was able to go a couple days later, extended my ticket, and that swim was everything that the English Channel wasn't. Total respect for the English Channel, and I loved the swim, but like for me, I was horrified when I heard that I like had to spend 2 years getting ready for the English Channel. Like, you know, even though I hadn't been swimming, I was like, why can't I do it this year? I spent 2 years prepping for this thing. It was so hyped up. Like, this is like so epic. This is, you know, and it was a surprisingly nice crossing. I didn't swim in the dark at all. It wasn't flat. But it was just nice, very manageable, faster than I was expecting. And I think if that had been it, like that would have just been lovely and that would have been it, you know. But then since I had this other swim coming up, you know, that I went over and I had to do the North Channel, and it was just the total opposite. It was I got out there, you know, it's a little bit colder, it's a lot rougher than the day that I had in the English Channel. Everything depends on the day. It's, you know, you just have this like 12-degree water smacking you in the face like every stroke, and this super supportive crew, you know, next to you. And at around 11 hours, and then I was kind of told like, well, you want to try and time it so that you're going to hit, you know, between 12 and 14 hours, because if you take longer, then the current's going to like push you back to Ireland. So I said, great, that's great, that's fine. So we're going for between 12 and 14 hours. I had just done the English Channel in like 11:52. And at about 11 hours, you know, into the North Channel, it was looking like I was really close. And then at 11:30, they said, oh, you're 800 meters away. And I started thinking, oh, I'm going to get like the same time for both swims. This is going to be so funny. And then at 12 hours, and then, you know, a half an hour goes by and they're like, oh, actually, even though the tide was supposed to turn, you know, like an hour from now or 2 hours from now, you're actually like 3,500, you know, meters away from it now, because of the storms that blew you out of the window like the last couple of days, you know, things are just happening that are unexpected. And you know, the tide changed, and and you're further away now, so just keep swimming. Can you sprint, please? So so I just went hard for a while longer, and it wasn't going anywhere. And eventually, you know, it's getting dark, and and you know, much to their credit, you know, Padraig and the guys in the boat, they said like, listen, you're swimming really well. We're not going to land right here, but if you can keep swimming like this, we can land you somewhere. We just don't really know where yet. So I said, sure. And so we're going, and we don't know where we're landing, and it takes 3 more hours. It's completely dark. There's no, like, you know, unless you're going straight for Port Patrick, which is a little bit of a city or town, and you can see the lights, there are no lights on Scotland, and it's the lowlands. There's nothing to see. So at a certain point, I was like, you guys, I can't see Scotland. Which direction am I swimming in, please? You know, because it's also windy. The boats on the North Channel are, most of them at this point are pretty small. They're great because they're really agile, But like a lot of the times, if it's really windy, they try to shield you from the wind, but then also you can't be too close to it because then it'll hit you too. So like they were, it was dark. Padraig had like, glow sticks, and he was directing me like to swim away from the boat. And I was like, no, but isn't Scotland this way? I don't want to go this way. Like, and I'm just like, I feel like I was swimming, running away from the boat and don't know which direction Scotland is in. They're trying to like test out, what's happening with the current. And it was like all the drama that, I was kind of expecting in the first swim and didn't get. And so eventually, so I'm not seeing any lights. I'm like swimming as hard as I can. And then finally I see some lights and I figure, well, that has to be Scotland. And I'm swimming, and I'm swimming towards this light and I don't know what I'm looking at. And eventually I can touch the ground. And also all the pictures I've seen of North Channel finishes at this point are all like, rocks and people, touching rock walls or climbing out on huge like rock formations. And I'm like at a sandy beach clearly. And what I had been looking at, the only light that I was looking at the entire time, it turned out was a bonfire. There were these guys camping on a beach. And so I like walk out of the North Channel, and these guys are sitting around drinking beer and they're not offering me any. And they're like, oh, did you just swim from that boat over there? And I said, oh, I swam from Ireland. And they had no response. They weren't like, they're like, oh. And then so eventually I said, well, I guess I should be going back now.
So Caroline, the part I'm missing, right? I understand you meet some unbelievably attractive, charming men in Italy from Ireland. I understand that part. I understand that they've sold you the vision of the North Channel as some combination of Tahiti and the Garden of Eden. I got that part. At what point when you arrived in Donaghadee did you realize that maybe what they had told you wasn't the Garden of Eden?
Oh, actually, it's funny. I think I don't think I was in Donaghadee except for being like on that rock when I was like starting. Like other than that, like split second where you're starting the channel, I wasn't in Donaghadee at all. I have stayed in Newry with the guys from Infinity every time I've gone. So by the time I was in Donaghadee at that rock, there was no time to think about this. I was just there to see my friends. I was like, hopefully I'll get a swim out of this. And then, you get in and it hurts your face and you're just like, well, gotta keep
And then
going.
given a choice of swimming into the rock or swimming for another 3.5 hours to meet the Scottish guys camping, I mean, what's going on? So anyways,
Yeah.
you've done the North Channel. Fantastic. One of the very few people at that point in the world that had ever done it. You knew from all of the experts that no one even thought ever about doing a over and back except Kevin Murphy, who dismissed it as complete nonsense. You've now gone for the double a couple of times.
Yeah.
Why? And what have your results been, and what's the future hold?
So when I finished swimming the one way, I felt pretty good. I felt fine. And then, it was news to me that like a lot of the times people don't feel fine after that. And started talking to Padraig about it, and definitely at that point thought like maybe I would try the double. I wanted to come back over. And I asked him if he thought it was possible. He said yes. They had done at that point, there had been a two-way relay already. So in my mind, if you've gotten a relay across, it's just a question of, was the additional speed that a relay has, does that make the difference or no? You know what I mean? But in terms of the tides, it's possible. And so at that point, I think immediately I thought like I would do something else the next summer and then come back, the summer after. But then just because of things I had going on in my life professionally, I thought actually scheduling wise, like, why don't I do this? Like, this is the year to do it. So I said, I'm going to come back over and try it this summer. So at this point, so I've tried twice. I've done 2 attempts at the double, 2017 and 2018. Both were unsuccessful. I made the single for both of them. They're very different swims. The one in 2017, I finished my dissertation. I defended my dissertation, and packed up and left for Ireland the next day. I sat in Ireland for quite a while waiting for a window, and it wasn't coming. We got to the end of the window again, and it was sort of like, this is the opportunity, you can do this or not. And it was like, there was no question of whether this was going to be an ideal swim or a pleasant swim. It was sort of, the question was like, is this doable or not at this point? Did we have a big enough weather window? And we knew when we took off that the way over was going to be very rough. It was expected to get better on the way back. So I said, it was basically, if you can get over there through this like horrific weather we're gonna get, we should be able to come back in slightly, better conditions. So I took off. I left in the evening, I think around 8 o'clock at night, for the first swim, and there were pretty big conditions going over, and because of that, it did take a while to get there. I think that was I wrote this down for you. I don't know, it was 15 and a half hours, 15:32 to get over the first way. And it was, longer than I was expecting. So when we got there, by the time we got there, and also like I lost a little bit of track of time. I wasn't exactly sure. Usually I'm pretty like, I know exactly how long it's been, but I wasn't sure if it was like slightly longer than that. And I wasn't sure, therefore, if we were still expecting to go, to turn around or not. So I landed on another beach, a different beach, not the one from the first time, but also not, these rocks that I keep seeing in pictures. I landed on a beach in front of, I looked it up afterwards, it was a luxury hotel. And asked Patrick, are we still doing this? And he said, oh yeah, the weather's going to be bad for like 2 more hours, but then it'll calm down. And I said, okay, sure. So took off again, went, and Podrick stayed in the water with me for the first half hour on the way back. And it was lovely while he was in the water. And then as soon as he got out, it kicked up again, like a lot. And I said, well, it's just a squall. It'll pass. Except, these was like way worse conditions than we had on the way over. And it was hours and hours and hours and hours. And what happened was, I think, you need to be at a certain place to get dropped a certain distance into the channel, just trying to play with, the currents and the tides, to catch the right tide to get back over. And we ended up just, in the middle of the channel for many hours because we just weren't at the right place at the right time. I think I made it, it was well over halfway back. But I'd been in, there for a while. And I think, we're coming into the second night. And, it was clear that we didn't know if we were going to land at all. At a certain point, I asked like, what was going on? Where are we going to land? How far?
You waited till you were 21, 22 hours into it to kind of ask what's going on, guys.
Yeah, at least 24 hours.
Give him a chance. Give him a chance.
I think around 24 hours, and it actually did start to, calm down a little bit. And I could swear that I was seeing like houses on Ireland. I don't think I did, but like I thought we were really close because I think I'd asked like hours before that, and we were like, about halfway through, except that like then it was 6 hours later and we were still about halfway through, and we're going and going, and then 25, 26 hours in, I'm starting, the air temperature went down significantly over that second night, and I said, you guys, like, I am not warm, and they said, I said, am I making progress? And they said, not right now. And I said, well, and so we agreed that I would, I said, well, I'll give it another hour. So then I swam another hour, and I said, are we making progress? And they said, well, eventually we were, 28 hours in, and the word was that, so there were a couple things at play. One, we didn't know if on the next turn of the tide, we would get swept out of the actual limitations of the North Channel. And whether or not I landed in the North Channel, we weren't sure if I had gone out of the North Channel, if it would count. And then also they said, well, we can tell if you swim for another 8 hours, we'll be able to tell you if you will be able to land. Not in 8 hours, but like at some point, we won't know for another 8 hours whether it will be possible to land at all. And I said, eventually, so then I get another half hour. And then eventually I said, like, listen, I'm fine now, but if we're not landing this, I would, maybe let's save this for another day. Like, I don't know if I'll be fine in another 8 hours. So if this isn't the right day to do this, so ended that. That was just under 29 hours. We ended at 11:59 at night, which kind of like bothers me a little bit because it wasn't an emergency. I didn't need to get out of the water. I could have stayed until the next day. But so there was that. And
so that would have given you yet another world record. You would have been in for 3 days instead of just the world record of 29 hours.
Yeah.
I could see where that would have been a big deal.
Yeah.
And based on that wonderful experience, you decided to have another go.
Yeah, I mean, I was upset that I hadn't made it, and listen, every time I've been in the North Channel, there have actually been other people signed up to do it and making attempts to do it. So I wanted to do it. I thought I could do it. Like, I wasn't done, when I got out. It just seemed to me that it wasn't the right day, and maybe if I had better conditions, like, it seemed like, this is the swim that I'm going to do. And, so
I don't think anybody listening is questioning your decision to get out after 29 hours of, you may or may not even be on track to get there ever. I think you made a good decision.
I thought so. So I signed up to do it again in 2017. And because I also knew that, I was working sort of in Ithaca and remotely that summer. So it seemed like a good time to do it. And actually both 2016 and 2017, I did long lake swims in June to sort of set up as a good training. So in 2016, I swam Lake George, which is 32 miles. In June before the double attempt, and then in 2017 I knew since I was here I would be able to swim Cayuga, which is 35 miles or 56k, something like that, in June, and then take off later in the summer and do the double. So the second double attempt it's funny, I think it doesn't seem as dramatic because it wasn't the first time someone had actually gotten back in the water, but technically I made it further. It was slightly less time. It was 26 and a half hours. Yeah, exactly, 26 and a half hours on that second one. We did not have rough conditions. It was earlier in the season. There was some pressure to kind of go. So it was also colder. We left that day, it was early, it was July 6th or 5th or 6th. I don't know if we're counting the first or second day, but we left at like 2:30 in the morning. Usually you leave like about an hour before high tide to high tide, depending on, because you want to usually climb for the first hour up towards the Copeland Islands. There's a current there that if you hit it at the right time will give you a push. It spins you out further into the channel. So if you follow North Channels, swims on like Track RS, you will usually notice that like people get done with the first half of the channel incredibly quickly, and then they just slow down from there. And that's actually not an effect. That's not entirely because people are tired. It's just how the swim works, because you do get a push ideally in that first half, and you absolutely do not in the second. So that plays into the timing of when you leave. So we actually left. So the high tide was at like after 5 in the morning, and we left at 2:43 in the morning. And there were reasons for that had nothing to do with getting there quickly. So in effect, I forewent any push and added hours onto that swim by going a little bit early. And of course, since we started in the dark with basically flat conditions, the first couple of hours of the swim, I'm getting stung. And then, by the time we're out in the middle, I think like, because it is such a pleasant swim, because it has not been overly choppy, I'm thinking like, wow, I must be making great time. This is going to be like, definitely under 12 hours for this crossing. And I was, patting myself on the back for not asking where we were yet. And finally I asked where we were. And it was just, I was not pleased with the answer. It ended up taking, it was such a slow crossing. It was like 16:45 or something like that to get over the first way. And arguably that was the right time to hit the land anyway. I just could have started later because we hit as the tide was turning. There was a relay swim that also swam that day, and they hit like just before I did. We also landed at a beach, this time just under the lighthouse, and I cannot tell you how great it is to like actually land at a beach and be able to get out those like 5-10 minutes.
Don't say that too loud. Sarah Thomas is still grumping that she
I
didn't
know.
get a beach on her four-way English Channel.
Because I think there were some points that were closer that we could have landed at, but we went the extra distance to get into the beach, and I don't know if at the time I would have told you I supported that, but like after the like 7 minutes on the shore, I totally, yeah, because it's such a nice reset. Anyway, so we actually hit it at the right time, even though it was like such a long crossing coming over. And because we hit it at that time, we were making great time on the way back. And that's why I was able to go like further towards Ireland, on this attempt in like 2 hours less. But because it was still, so we're making great time, and then, it gets dark, swimming over the night. And that night, it was still incredibly still. And just the jellyfish were, everyone in the boat said they'd just never seen so many jellyfish. There were just thousands. They were everywhere. And for a while, they were trying to, like, they were sticking lights in the water, like, to try to illuminate them so I would see them, except that then you don't see them until they're about in your face anyway. And then, the idea was like to try to dodge the larger ones, even though they're just everywhere. So then eventually, during the night, so like, so you're swimming like this back and forth, and then they say, well, your progress is slowed. Well, because I'm going like this and not going, towards. So then we just gave up on that. And so I swam through the jellies, and then by the time the sun came up, I was just so full of venom. And the thing is, I'd been stung on all of my other attempts, but just not to that extent. And I just don't think I realized exactly what the effect would be. And so the venom, you probably know, the venom comes out like your extremities. That's where you kind of feel its effects. And to me, it just felt like I feel cold and I'm not like used to this. So my core didn't feel cold, but my arms and legs felt very cold to me. And I think now I know that was actually the venom. But to me, I was just very nervous about like what it was that I was feeling. And you just work yourself up into this state where you're like, no, I should get out. Like, this is not good. And so we called the swim at 5 o'clock. I had been sort of, kind of gunning to get out for a while at that point. And I actually do regret that decision, because I think I don't know exactly what the tides were doing, but it's possible I could have swum for another 5-6 hours and made it. And also probably the jellies were going to go away in the day, because I had made it through all of them, but I just was not, is my inexperience, not knowing exactly what, if I felt that on another swim, now I think that I would push through those last couple of hours. I think I would feel comfortable with that.
I don't think being full of lion's mane jellyfish venom is is some knowledge you're born with. It's not a common, knowledge. So I wouldn't kick yourself too much on that. Last question.
Yeah.
Are you done with the Garden of Eden in the north, or you're heading back again?
No, I'm definitely going back. So after
the
after the 2018 swim, we agreed that I would do a different swim in 2019 and then attempt the double again in 2020. Last year I went over again. I was supposed to swim Isle of Man, and I was gonna go the next morning. I had just like gone to Tesco and gotten everything for the boat. I was all ready, and then that last weather report came in, and I got the word like, oh, it's actually not possible. You can't, like, nobody is out there, even on a surfboard. You can't. It's just more exposed that, but they had a full, slate of swimmers during the North Channel, and they said, well, if you don't want to go home with nothing, we can squeeze you in for a one-way on the North Channel. Do you want to do that? And I said, sure. So I, changed my paperwork and went to bed and got up and just did another single. But yeah, the double is still definitely on my mind.
I can imagine you'd be swimming along and you see that same big nasty jellyfish and you go, do me a favor, get me on the way back, knowing that you're not coming back that time. You just sneak on in. Well, Caroline, we want to thank you very much. We want to wish you all the best on your next endeavor. I don't have to remind you that no one really ever tried a double North Channel. You're considered a heroine by most people in the sport. And if you actually do make the over and back, world record.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.